What would you do if the man you trusted with your future, the man you built your life around, the man whose last name you took, whose clothes you washed, whose dreams you carried when yours were slipping away, stood in front of you one morning, smiled like everything was normal, kissed you on the cheek, and by nightfall, wiped out your bank account, signed the divorce papers, and left you with nothing but a half-lit living room, a cold plate of dinner, and a silence so deep it felt like dying slowly in a house that no longer remembered your name? Because that's what Jason did to me, on my birthday. While I was lighting candles, he was ending our marriage, and when the door closed behind him, I swear, it sounded like the world collapsing. He wasn't the kind of man you fell in love with slowly. Jason had a way of walking into a room like he'd already won you. He had this calm confidence, not arrogant, not loud, just certain, about himself, about what he wanted. And in those early days, he wanted me. We met in college. I was 22, still figuring out who I was, what I wanted. I wanted to travel. I wanted to bake. I wanted to open a tiny cafe with yellow walls and handwritten menus. But Jason, he had other plans. He talked about real estate, legacy, making moves. And somehow, being next to him made me feel like I was already successful, even before I'd done anything. I didn't realize it then, but I was mistaking his ambition for stability. And stability was seductive. He proposed 2 years later, under the stars, behind my mother's old barn, with a ring that sparkled more than I thought we could afford. I said yes before he even finished asking. I thought it was the beginning of something big. I didn't realize it was the beginning of me shrinking. We bought a modest home in a quiet suburb in Ohio, 2 golden retrievers, matching towels, the kind of life you see in insurance commercials. He worked long hours, I kept the house warm. And I told myself it was love, real love, the kind that sacrifices, the kind that bends. So I let go of the cafe, packed away the dream in a box labeled, someday, and I told myself I was lucky. Because at the time, I still believed that being chosen meant being cherished. Our dogs, Milo and Penny, they were the babies we never had. And Jason, well, he said he wasn't ready for kids. Not yet, not with the market the way it was, not while he was building the business. There was always a reason, always a later. But I held on, I waited. For anniversaries, he gave me expensive jewelry. For holidays, I gave him handwritten letters. I used to think that made us different, balanced. Now, I see it for what it was. I gave him heart. He gave me just enough to keep me staying. I used to count the hours until Jason came home. I'd set the table, light the candles, put on the soft music he liked. And for a while, he noticed. He'd kiss my cheek, say, "Smells amazing, babe," and we'd eat together like we meant it. But then the hours started stretching. First, it was once a week he came home late, then twice, then every night. He'd text, always the same message, running behind, "Don't wait up." And so I didn't. But the dinner still waited. It sat on the table, untouched, going cold while I reheated the story I was going to tell him about my day, the one he never asked to hear. He came home smelling like cologne I didn't recognize. And sometimes, like nothing at all, just cold air and distance. He'd walk right past me, straight into the shower. I used to ask how his day was. Eventually, I stopped asking. In bed, he began to turn away from me. Physically, emotionally. Sex became an obligation, quick, silent, disconnected. And when I asked if something was wrong, he'd say, "You're imagining things. Stop being dramatic." He said it like a reflex, like he'd practiced, like my concerns were a burden instead of a truth. One night, I heard his second phone buzz. He always kept it face down, said it was for work. I believed him, until I didn't. I picked it up while he was in the shower. I know I shouldn't have, but curiosity, when it meets suspicion, becomes survival. That's what I tell myself now. The screen lit up, a message from someone named Lana, just a peach emoji and a heart, and a photo I won't describe. My hands went cold, not shaking, frozen, like my body was waiting to confirm what my heart already knew. I didn't confront him right away. I closed the phone, put it back exactly how I found it, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to the shower run, wondering how long he'd been letting other women into the part of him I used to call home. The worst part wasn't the messages. It wasn't even the betrayal I was starting to piece together. It was the way he looked at me differently, like I was some ghost he had to be polite to until I faded. He started picking fights, over nothing, the laundry detergent, the way I folded towels. One time he snapped at me because I forgot to refill the ice tray. That's when I knew, it wasn't about the towels. It was never about the towels. I told him I felt him slipping away. He laughed and said I was paranoid, that I always had a flair for the dramatic. Then he kissed my forehead like I was a child who'd had a nightmare and went back to scrolling through his phone. But the moment everything shifted, it wasn't Jason, it was his mother. She'd always smiled at me like I was a substitute. Polite, measured, cold. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone in the kitchen, not realizing I was in the hallway. She said, "She was never right for you, Jason. She's too soft for your world. She folds under pressure. You need someone with spine." And he didn't disagree. He didn't defend me. He just said, "I know." That's when I realized I wasn't just losing Jason. I was being erased, quietly, completely, like I had never been the woman he once swore he'd grow old with. There's a difference between not knowing and pretending not to know. I'd been pretending for months. I stopped asking questions because I already hated the answers my heart was whispering. But that night, something snapped. Jason had told me he was going to a networking dinner. He wore his gray blazer, the one he used to save for our date nights. He left without a kiss. No eye contact. Just the front door closing a little too softly. I sat in silence for 15 minutes. Then I grabbed my coat, keys, and followed the GPS signal on the second phone he didn't know I still had access to. I didn't even feel like myself anymore. I felt like a detective trapped in her own marriage, chasing ghosts with her own name on them. I found him outside a boutique hotel just outside the city, one of those places with marble planters and too much gold trim. It was too nice for business, too romantic for work. I parked across the street, slid low in the seat, waited, and then I saw her. She couldn't have been more than 27. Long blonde hair, tight burgundy dress, heels that clicked like confidence. She walked up to him like she'd done it before. He smiled, really smiled, the way he hadn't smiled at me in months. Then he kissed her, not hesitant, not guilty, like she belonged to him, like I never did. I don't remember getting out of the car, I just remember walking. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I crossed the street. I called his name, and when he turned around, he didn't look surprised. He didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting to get caught. Amber's smile faded. She took a step back. I asked him, "No," I demanded, "who is she?" He didn't answer. What he did say, "I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it." He looked me straight in the face, in front of her, and said, "You haven't been my wife in years, Claire." Then he turned back to Amber like I was nothing more than an interruption. I stood in that parking lot until my fingers went numb. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, still in my coat. Jason didn't come home. Instead, a man in a crisp blue suit arrived 3 days later, holding an envelope I had to sign for divorce papers. It was the first time I saw how many things were in Jason's name. The house, the cars, the accounts, everything we had built, technically belonged to him. I logged into our joint account to pay the water bill. The screen said, "Insufficient funds, balance, $0. I blinked, refreshed the page, still zero. He had drained every cent. And then I remembered. He'd asked me months ago if I wanted to switch to paperless statements. I said yes, because I trusted him, because I was stupid. 3 days after that, a sheriff's deputy taped a notice to the front door. It said I had 10 days to vacate. The mortgage was never in my name. I didn't own the house I decorated for 7 Christmases. I didn't own the kitchen where I baked him birthday cakes. I didn't even own the damn couch I was sitting on. I curled up on the floor that night, knees to my chest, surrounded by walls that no longer felt like mine. It's strange how quickly a home can become a stranger. And stranger still, how someone you loved can become a man you wouldn't recognize in a crowd. When the papers came, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a lawyer. I couldn't afford one. Jason made sure of that. Every dollar we had, the we I thought existed, was gone. I checked every account, every joint fund, empty. He even closed the grocery card I used. So I went to court alone, with my spiral notebook full of receipts and photographs and hope. Hope that if I just told the truth, someone would believe me. I wore my best dress, the same one I'd worn to his work gala years ago, when he still called me his better half. I remember looking in the mirror that morning and not recognizing the woman staring back. She looked tired and small. When I stepped into the courtroom, Jason was already there. He didn't look at me. He sat flanked by 2 attorneys, sharp suits, polished shoes. They smiled at the judge like this was just paperwork. His lawyers started reading from a file I'd never seen, full of stories I didn't recognize. They said I was unstable, that I'd refused therapy, that I was erratic, emotional, prone to depressive episodes, that I'd made violent threats during our marriage. I opened my mouth to object, to speak, but the words stuck. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just that he was lying, it was that he sounded so convincing. I realized, he had been building this version of me for months, maybe years, piece by piece, silencing me before I even knew I'd need to speak. When the judge ruled in his favor, it wasn't dramatic. There was no gavel slam, no outburst, just words, final, cold, words. I lost the house, the car, the dogs. He claimed I couldn't support them. Even the furniture stayed with him. I walked out of that courtroom feeling erased, like my name had been removed from the story of my own life. I went back to the house one last time, not to pack, just to stand there. I sat on the front steps until dusk, waiting for I don't even know what. Maybe I thought Jason would come out, say something, a goodbye, an apology, a moment of recognition, but the porch light never turned on, and the door stayed closed. So I went around the side gate, opened the shed, and pulled out the 2 old suitcases my mother gave me before she passed. I packed what I could: clothes, toothbrush, my baking notebook, a photograph from our honeymoon that I later threw in the trash. I didn't know where to go. My phone had 9% battery. My pride wouldn't let me call anyone, so I drove. Nowhere. Just far enough to feel like I was leaving it all behind. I parked in the back corner of a Walmart parking lot, where the lights didn't reach, pulled a blanket from the trunk and curled up in the driver's seat. The engine off, the windows cracked, the world silent. And that night, in that car, I had my first panic attack. My chest clamped shut like a fist. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying, but I wasn't. I was just, finally feeling the weight of everything that had been taken from me. The next morning, I pawned my wedding ring. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She weighed it, squinted at the stone, typed the number into the screen. She said, $300, cash or card? And I nodded, cash, because I didn't even have a card anymore. I remember holding that money in my hands, crisp and folded. It felt heavier than gold. It felt like failure. It felt like everything I had to show for 12 years of loyalty, love, and lies. They say grief has stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But they forgot about another one: survival. The one where you're too tired to cry, too scared to rest, and too ashamed to ask for help. After I pawned the ring, I used the money to buy gas, some food, and a burner phone. I told myself I'd be back on my feet in a week. Just needed to catch my breath, apply for jobs, reset. A week became 10 days. 10 days became a month. I slept in parking lots, rest stops, sometimes a church parking lot if I got there late enough. I showered at gas stations, the kind with flickering lights and floors that never really dried. I kept a small tote of toiletries in the back seat: dry shampoo, baby wipes, travel soap. I used to plan dinner parties. Now I was calculating which public restroom had hot water. I started going to a food pantry twice a week. They gave out expired cans, bruised fruit, half loaves of bread. I smiled, said thank you, even when someone handed me a dented can of green beans and whispered, God bless, like I was less than them. The shame sticks to you. You think it'll pass, but it doesn't. It lives in your bones, in your breath. I applied to everything, everywhere. Retail, cleaning, dog walking, data entry. I slipped my resume under doors, taped handwritten notes to back entrances. Nobody called. Until one afternoon, a small grocery store on the edge of town offered me a shift, 4 hours, minimum wage, no benefits. I took it. I wore the same black pants 3 days in a row and hoped no one noticed. Stocked shelves, bagged groceries, smiled at strangers who didn't look me in the eye. Then one day, I saw someone I knew from before. Her name was Emily. We used to host book club together. She was with her husband. They didn't see me at first. I was kneeling by the freezer, restocking bags of ice. But when they did, she looked away too fast. And I heard her say under her breath, she just couldn't keep him. Like I was a dropped glass, like the failure was mine. Not his lies, not his betrayal, just me. Like love is something you're supposed to hold on to even after it shatters you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn around and say, I stayed. I gave him everything. I chose him when I could have had someone better. I loved him while he erased me, but I didn't say anything. I just kept stacking the ice. I thought about calling my father. He hadn't spoken to me since I married Jason. Said I was throwing away my future for a man he didn't trust. I told him he didn't understand. He said I'd learn the hard way. He was right. I did, but I still couldn't pick up the phone. Pride is cruel that way. It convinces you to suffer in silence, just to prove a point no one's keeping score of. Every day became a quiet war. A war between my past and my pride. Between asking for help, and convincing myself I didn't need it. And the thing no one tells you about rock bottom is that it doesn't come with a bang. It comes quietly, slowly, in missed calls, bruised fruit, and the sound of your own voice saying, "I'm okay," when you're not. It had been 6 weeks since the divorce was finalized. 6 weeks since I last said his name out loud. I had learned to speak around it. I never called him my ex or Jason. I just called him he, like a ghost. I was standing outside the grocery store on my 15-minute break when the message came through. The message was short. No punctuation. No greeting. He lied to both of us. Can we talk? My first instinct was to delete it, block the number, throw the phone, but I didn't. Instead, I stared at the screen for 5 minutes, just reading those 7 words over and over like they were written in fire. We met the next afternoon at a cafe on the east side, neutral ground. I wore a sweater that didn't fit right. She wore makeup and a tight coat, the kind of woman I used to side-eye and secretly envy. She ordered a matcha latte. I ordered black coffee I couldn't afford. We sat in silence for a long time. She was prettier than I remembered. Younger too. No wedding ring. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't shake. Mine did. She told me he said I was crazy, that I cheated, that I stole from him, that I had a problem with alcohol, pills, men, that he tried to rescue me, that he'd been through hell because of me. She told me she believed him, that she felt sorry for him, that's why she stuck around. She told me she was pregnant, and then she told me, he was gone, just like that, changed his number, blocked her on everything, no goodbye, no answers. She said she was scared, said she felt stupid, said she had nowhere to go. I wanted to feel vindicated, wanted to look her in the eye and say, I told you so, but I didn't, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired, so tired. I listened, I nodded, I told her what I knew, the way he drained our accounts, the lies, the hotel, the night I followed him. I laid it out like a roadmap, and she followed every twist like someone trying to uncrash a car that had already hit the wall. She asked me if I thought he ever loved either of us. I said, I don't think he knows what love is. We didn't hug. There was no tearful sisterhood moment, no closure, just 2 women sitting in the aftermath of the same hurricane, staring at the same empty sky. Eventually, I found a room, a studio apartment the size of a motel room, with 1 window, 1 door, and walls thin enough to hear the neighbor cough through. But it had a lock. It had heat. And for the first time in months, I wasn't falling asleep in a parking lot. The mattress was on the floor. The fridge made a noise like it was trying not to die. The ceiling had a brown stain above the bed. But it was mine, or at least, it was rented. I brought in a single box of belongings, clothes, a toothbrush, a mug, my old baking journal. I left everything else behind, not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear to look at any of it anymore. I started a blog, called it Healing After Him. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought if I put the pain somewhere outside of me, it would shrink. Maybe I thought other women would find it, read it, say, me too, but no one came. 1 post got 3 views, 2 from me, 1 from a bot that left a spam comment about Bitcoin. Still, I kept writing. In the middle of the night, under candlelight, with the sound of sirens in the distance, I typed out memories like confession. Like maybe if I was honest enough, I'd finally get to feel whole again. I got a job at a bookstore, part-time, just enough to cover rent and cheap groceries. My manager was kind. She never asked questions. She gave me the late shift, when the store was quiet and the lights were soft. I shelved books about love, loss, healing, and happiness. Sometimes I'd pause and flip through the pages. I kept hoping I'd find my story in one of them. I never did. I tried therapy too, found a clinic that charged based on income. My therapist was nice enough, young, polite. She wore sweaters that looked expensive but tried not to seem like it. I told her everything, from beginning to end. I laid it all out like evidence in a trial I had already lost. She listened, took notes, asked about my childhood, asked if I felt safe. Then one day she said, "Claire, you haven't grieved yet." And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't realize I was still holding my breath. I walked home that night and sat on the edge of my mattress, thinking about how strange it is to grieve someone who's still alive, who probably never thought about you again. I wondered if he ever looked back. If he ever remembered the woman who packed his lunches, the woman who sang to the dogs, the woman who forgave him before she even knew why. But I knew the answer. He didn't. I was rebuilding, yes, but it didn't feel like life. It felt like maintenance, like surviving with no soundtrack. The walls were up, the roof didn't leak, the bills got paid, but nothing felt real, nothing felt like mine. And the thing no one tells you after a divorce is that sometimes, you don't rise. Sometimes, you just rearrange the ruins. I started missing shifts at the bookstore. At first, it was once, then twice. I'd oversleep, or say I wasn't feeling well. Sometimes I'd just stare at the door and think, what's the point of going? And the truth is, I didn't have one. I told myself I needed a break. That grief was a job in itself. But the manager stopped calling. I checked the schedule one day, and my name was gone. She never said I was fired, but the silence spoke clearly enough. The money ran low again. I checked my account one morning. $14. That was it. Enough for some bread, maybe a can of soup. Not enough for hope. My anxiety came back hard, a constant thrum beneath the skin. Breathing felt like effort. Eating felt like a task. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I didn't know. I stopped writing in my blog for a while. When I came back to it, my words felt different. Sharper, quieter, more final. I wrote, "Some people rise." I sank. And I hit publish. Not because I thought anyone would read it, but because if I didn't say it out loud, I might start believing it wasn't real. I stopped going outside as much. The sunlight made everything look too alive, too bright for someone who felt invisible. One afternoon, I passed by a small park on my way to the pharmacy. I heard laughter, the kind that cuts straight through you when it's not yours. And there she was, Amber, sitting on a bench under a tree, holding a baby in her arms, smiling at a man who was definitely not Jason. He looked kind, the way he leaned toward her, the way he touched the baby's head with such quiet reverence. They looked like a family, like something out of the life I never got. I don't know if she saw me. I doubt it. I turned before I gave her the chance. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her smile. I didn't want the ghost of what we'd shared, that brief, painful moment of understanding, to float back into my life. I went home, closed the blinds, sat in the dark, and I stayed there for a long time. The worst part of depression isn't the crying. It's not the sadness. It's the numbness, the quiet, the way every minute feels like chewing dry paper. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I was doing okay, that not being in crisis anymore meant I was better. But I wasn't better. I was disappearing, slowly, silently, without anyone noticing. And the scariest thing wasn't that I felt alone. It was that I had stopped caring that I was. You hear stories about people who lose everything and find purpose, who rise from the ashes stronger, clearer, more whole. But not everyone rises. Some of us just live in the ashes, long enough that they feel like home. It started with a dream. I don't remember most of it, just that I was happy. I was laughing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, and a man was smiling at me. But when I turned to see his face, it wasn't Jason. It was Daniel. I woke up with his name in my mouth, like it had been waiting to be spoken again. That morning, I dug out the shoebox I kept under my mattress, the one I hadn't touched in years. Letters, Polaroids, bits and pieces of a life I turned down, and I started remembering, not just Jason, but the men before him, the ones who saw me, the ones I didn't choose. Daniel, my best friend since 7th grade. He proposed once, before Jason. We were 25, sitting on the hood of his truck, drinking cider, watching fireflies. He pulled out a ring pop, got down on one knee, and said, "Let's grow old the slow way." I laughed, thought he wasn't serious, but his eyes, they were. And I said no, because I thought love had to be dramatic, sweeping, complicated. Daniel was too steady, too kind, too safe. I didn't realize that kindness isn't boring. It's everything. Eric came after. My freshman year boyfriend. He wrote me poems on napkins, tucked notes into my coat pockets, called me Sunflower Girl. He wanted to move to Portland together, open a bookstore, live in a loft with too many plants. I told him no. I said I wanted something more stable. What I meant was, I wanted someone more secure. Someone who had a 401k and a plan. I thought poetry wouldn't pay the bills, but Eric loved me like art, like I was worth framing. And then there was Malcolm. We worked together for a year. He was older, smart, witty, always brought 2 coffees, just in case I was having a bad day. He asked me out twice, once at the copier, Once on a rainy Tuesday when he said, "I know you're taken, but if he ever breaks your heart, I'd be honored to pick up the pieces." I smiled, told him I was happy. I wasn't. I think about Malcolm sometimes when I'm walking home in the rain. I wonder if he still drinks his coffee black. If he still waits for someone who never chose him. I always chased safety, but safety doesn't always mean love. And Jason, he looked like safety. He talked like structure. He walked like certainty. But what he really was hollow. A shell I tried to fill with my dreams. And every time I poured more of myself into him, I lost a little more of me. I didn't choose the ones who saw me. I chose the one who needed me to shrink. I used to imagine growing old with Jason, sitting on a porch swing, dogs at our feet, sharing memories. But now when I imagine the future, it's empty. Not sad, not tragic, just blank. Because I gave the best of me to someone who didn't even want the worst of me, and I turned away from the people who did. Regret isn't a sharp pain. It's a slow bruise. It spreads. It settles in your spine, your voice, your choices. And the cruelest thing about it? You never get to know the life you didn't live. You just get to imagine it, over and over. And some nights, that's worse than anything Jason ever did. There's a kind of grief that doesn't scream. It just settles, like dust, slowly, quietly, until one day, you wake up, and you're living inside it. I got the eviction notice taped to my door on a Tuesday. I'd already fallen behind by 2 months. I kept telling myself I'd catch up, that something would change, but the truth was, nothing changed. I didn't rise. I just delayed the fall. I packed everything I owned into the trunk of my car in less than 20 minutes. Because that's what happens when you've already lost everything once. You learn not to gather too much again. The car became home again. Only this time, it felt different. The first time I lived in my car, I had hope. A sense that it was temporary. That I'd bounce back. But the second time, I knew better. I stopped looking for something better. I just looked for something that paid. I got a job cleaning rooms at a rundown motel just off the highway. They didn't ask questions. Just handed me a cart full of towels, some gloves, and a badge with no name on it. It was hard work. The kind that breaks your back and your spirit at the same time. Some rooms were trashed. Some rooms were too clean, like no one ever used them at all. I scrubbed toilets, changed sheets, picked up beer bottles and broken promises. I listened to guests laugh behind their doors, watched couples check in with overnight bags and matching smiles. And I smiled back. Because that was the job. Some guests looked at me like I didn't exist. Some looked through me. I preferred the ones who didn't look at all. The job paid just enough to buy gas and a few groceries. Not enough for rent. Not enough for counseling. Not enough for anything that felt like life. I started writing again. Just small notes. Thoughts. Fragments. I didn't call it a blog this time. Just a journal on my dashboard. That's what I wrote one night. Those exact words. And it stayed with me. Like a bruise I couldn't see, but always felt. He didn't just leave me without money, without a home. He left me without a version of myself I could return to. I kept my old engagement ring. I don't know why. It didn't mean anything anymore. But I couldn't throw it away. Maybe I needed the reminder. Maybe I needed proof that I once belonged to something, even if it ended in silence. My last journal entry was short. 4 words. I didn't write again after that. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood that no one was listening. I wrote, "No dreams left." There's this idea people cling to, that every fall leads to a rise. That hitting rock bottom means the only way is up. But some people live at the bottom. Some people make a home there, not because they want to, but because they've forgotten what light looks like. There's a chapel downtown, tucked between a florist and a thrift store. I passed it on my walk back from the motel one evening. It wasn't fancy. The paint was peeling. The steps were crooked, but the lights were on, and through the front window, I saw 2 people, maybe late 20s, dancing slowly to a song only they could hear. She wore a short white dress. He wore jeans and nerves. They were smiling like they knew something the rest of us didn't. I stood there for a long time. I don't know why. Maybe I was waiting for something, a feeling, a memory, an answer. But nothing came, just a strange stillness. Like my body remembered something I'd long since forgotten. And then I said it, not out loud, but in my mind, clearer than anything I'd written, clearer than anything I'd confessed to my therapist or my blog. I said, if I could go back, I'd say no. I wouldn't marry Jason. I'd choose the life I let go. I'd open that bakery. I'd say yes to Daniel, or move to Portland with Eric, or grab coffee with Malcolm. I'd be terrified, but at least I'd be honest. Some people rebuild. They find themselves in yoga studios or book clubs or brave new cities. But me? I didn't rebuild. I just remember. I remember the girl who used to laugh with her mouth wide open, the woman who danced in kitchens, the wife who believed that loving hard was enough to be loved in return. And some stories, mine included, they don't end in a comeback. They end in silence. Jason didn't just leave. He didn't just betray. He didn't just take my money, my home, or my dogs. He erased me. Or maybe I erased myself by choosing him. And now I'm just what's left after the noise dies down. She never found herself again, but she never forgot who she used to be. What would you have done in Claire's shoes? Have you ever given everything to the wrong person? Would you have chosen love, or safety,